The voice is not a sound. It does not vibrate the air. It is a pressure, a resonance that impresses itself upon the mind as if it were a memory you always possessed, but had until this very moment forgotten. It is patient like dust settling in a crypt. It is ancient like the slow, cold burn of a dying star. It is the voice of Malachi Vost, the Fate-Weaver Lord Sorcerer of the Thousand Suns. Truth, the voice whispers coiling through the non-space of the Paradox Engine's bridge, is the first and greatest lie. It is the bedrock upon which the Imperium builds its cathedral of ignorance, and it is a bedrock of sand. They believe truth is immutable, a fixed point in the raging tempest of reality, a constant. They are fools. There are no constants. There is only change and the will to direct it. On the bridge, there are no crewmen screaming at consoles. There are no cogitator banks clattering with data. There is only Malachi, his ornate cerulean armor, reflecting a light that does not exist. He stands before the oculus of potential, a swirling captive galaxy of raw warp energy, contained not by Geller fields, but by 9 layers of intricate shifting sigils. Every star in the oculus is a possibility. Every nebula a convergence of futures. Malachi is not a captain. He is a curator of destiny. My brothers, those who fell to the Red Angel's madness, they see reality as an anvil. The voice continues a silken thread of thought. They strike it with the hammer of their rage, seeking to shatter it. The mewling slaves of the Corpse Emperor seek to protect it, to build walls around their precious, fragile truth, and hide from the storm. They do not understand. Reality is not an anvil to be broken, nor a fortress to be defended. It is clay. It is wet, pliable, waiting for the touch of the sculptor. And I am the sculptor. He raises a gauntlet, and the swirling energies of the oculus shift. They spiral and coalesce, focusing on a dim, unremarkable sector. The segmentum obscurus, a stain of cosmic shadow choked by warp storms, abandoned by the light of Terra. They have 9 theses of their own. 9 holy tenets of their faith. Let this be my first thesis. Their faith is not their shield. It is their finest weapon. They simply point it in the wrong direction. They hold it aloft, a pathetic aegis, against the majesty of the primordial creator, begging for protection. They do not see the edge it possesses. They call their faith a shield. I will prove it is a sword, and I will turn it slowly, surely, until it points directly at their own heart. The oculus zooms, passing through nebulae of screaming souls and voids of silent potential, until it settles on a single, muddy, insignificant planet. A smear of brown and gray. Gilead Primus. A feudal world. A planet of castles, knights, and illiterate masses, huddled in wooden hovels, fearing the dark. Strategically worthless. It produces no titans, fuels, no fleets. It is a rounding error in the Imperial census. To the War Master, it would be beneath notice. To the Ordo Malleus, a backwater. But Malachi sees what they do not. He does not see the armies. He sees the echo. For 1,000 years, the ecclesiarchy has tried to silence it. Malachi's thoughts muse a flicker of academic curiosity in his tone. A local superstition, a primitive folktale, a savior from the stars, they whisper in their hovels, a myth that predates the Imperial creed. A being who will descend from the heavens and grant them ascension. A promise of escape from their brutal short lives. He sees the history of it written in the currents of the warp. He sees the bonfires of the missionaries burning the ancient scrolls. He sees the public executions of the sky seers. He sees the Ministorum priests replacing the word savior with emperor and ascension with service. But the echo remained. The harder the Imperium pressed, the deeper the myth burrowed, twisting itself into the planet's psychic bedrock. It became a story told to children in the dark, a prayer uttered when the tithe collectors arrived, a secret hope. They tried to erase it. They sought to smother the flame of this ridiculous, hopeful lie. Amateurs. You do not extinguish a flame by starving it. You extinguish it by giving it too much fuel too quickly until it consumes itself. Or you harness it. You build a furnace around it. You aim the jet. Malachi's plan is not one of conquest. He will send no Rubrikai to burn their cities. He will not raise armies of screaming Tzangors to pull down their keeps. That is the logic of Khorne. It is banal. It is predictable. The Imperium sought to deny their prophecy. I will fulfill it. A slow, cold smile plays across the unseen features within his helm. The Paradox engine glides through the Empyrean, its prow pointed not at a fortress, but at a single, fragile, powerful idea. He will not send a fleet. He will send a story. He will take their lie, their pathetic little truth, and he will sharpen it. He will give them their savior. He will grant them their ascension. And in doing so, he will forge the key to a door they don't even know exists. The first thesis is complete. The experiment is ready. The clay awaits the sculptor's hand. A wound tore open in the void. It was not the violent, screaming rupture of a chaos fleet, nor the precise surgical incision of an Imperial vessel. It was a weeping sore, a pockmark in the fabric of real space that oozed a single unremarkable ship. The St. Aspira's Folly, an independent tramp freighter, its hull scarred by micrometeorites and its registry codes flickering between a dozen different low-level charters. It was garbage floating flotsam on the cosmic tide, utterly beneath the notice of any orbital defense grid. It coasted on low power, its augers dark, letting Gilead Primus's gravity well pull it gently, inevitably into its embrace. Deep within its unlit cargo hold, there was no cargo, only people. They were not the frothing, mutated cultists of the common nightmare. They were the hidden word. They sat in silent meditation, their forms cloaked in the rough-spun gray robes of mendicant preachers. Their faces were serene, their eyes closed. They numbered only 39, 9 times 4 plus 3. The numbers were important. Their leader, a man whose name had been erased and replaced by the title Herald, opened his eyes. They were a clear, startling blue. He rose, his movements fluid. He carried no weapon. His only possession was a heavy leather-bound tome, its cover embossed with a faded, battered aquila. The soil is prepared. He whispered, his voice a calm balm in the cold darkness. The seed is in our hand. We must not fail the architect. The Folly's automated systems, guided by the unseen hand of Malachi, piloted a single cargo shuttle through the upper atmosphere. The shuttle did not aim for a hidden valley or a desolate waste. It descended with brazen confidence, its heat shielding glowing a dull, righteous cherry red as it streaked across the morning sky directly towards the high city of Gilead, the planet's seat of power. It crashed as intended in the great plaza before the cathedral of the Emperor's Vigil, a calculated, spectacular, but non-lethal arrival. The shuttle's prow crumpled against the flagstones, steam hissing from ruptured vents. For a moment, the medieval city fell silent. The clang of blacksmiths, the cries of merchants, the chant of priests all ceased. Then the local PDF, clad in mismatched plate armor and carrying gleaming las muskets, surrounded the wreckage, their faces a mix of terror and confusion. Heresy 1 barked, his voice cracking. Xenos, burn it, but the cargo ramp lowered with a pneumatic sigh, and the hidden word emerged. They did not run. They did not fight. They walked one by one into the sunlight, their hands clasped before them. The herald led them, holding his book aloft. They knelt on the stones, a perfect tableau of supplication. Confessor Geyer, the high priest of Gilead Primus, pushed through the ring of soldiers. He was a portly man, his robes of office stained with wine and gravy, his face flushed with indignation. "What is this mockery?" he boomed, his jeweled crozius held high. "Speak, blasphemer, before I purge your filth." The herald looked up, his serene blue eyes meeting the confessors. "We are the lost," he said, his voice carrying with unnatural clarity across the plaza. "We have drifted for an age in the night, but we have seen the light. We have seen him, the Savior from the stars." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of onlookers. The soldiers shifted. That word, that name. It was the root of the old heresy, the forbidden folktale. Lies. Gear roared, spittle flying from his lips. "There is no Savior but the God Emperor of mankind. He is one and the same confessor," the herald said, gently bowing his head. "We were blind, but now we see. The Emperor has sent his harbinger. The old words are true. The time of ascension is nigh." He pushed the heavy tome across the stones. "We bring proof. The lost epistles of St. Jerome found adrift in the void. They speak of this world. They speak of this day." Confessor Geyer stared at the book. Arrogance warred with curiosity. To burn them all would be simple. It would be expected. But lost epistles. A text that could confirm his world's divine purpose. A text he would be the one to discover and interpret. The vanity was overwhelming. He motioned to his guards. "Seize them. Seize the book. They will be interrogated. Their truth will be burned from them." The hidden word didn't resist. They went to their martyrdom with beatific smiles. That night in the privacy of his scriptorium, Confessor Geyer did not alert the Inquisition. He did not call his superiors. He lit a candle, poured a goblet of amisac, and opened the book. The script was masterful, a perfect imitation of high Gothic ecclesiarchal text. It spoke of the Emperor's divinity of faith of service. But it was seeded like a virus with new ideas. It referenced the Great Changer not as a demon, an enemy, but as the will of the Emperor, the divine engine of change itself. It spoke of the Gilead prophecy, not as heresy, but as a holy foreshadowing of a new age. Geyer read, and as he read, he frowned. He was confused. This was compelling. It was dangerous. It was beautiful. He did not notice the faint color-shifting aura that began to glow in his eyes. He did not hear the whispers that had already begun to spread from the plaza, carried by the soldiers, the merchants, the beggars who had witnessed the arrival. The Savior was coming. The lost texts had been found. The prophecy was real. The seed planted in the fertile soil of pride had begun to sprout. Thousands of light years, distant on the cold, chrome-plated bridge of the Dauntless-class cruiser, Sanctity's Blade Inquisitor, Katerina Vore, had no interest in Gilead Primus. Her hunt was for the remnants of a slaunchy pleasure cult that had defiled the station world of Cygnus X1, and she was proceeding with relentless precision. She was a woman forged from certainty. Her faith was steel, her will a straight line. Chaos to her was a deviation to be corrected, heresy a disease to be cauterized. The distraction began subtly. Her astropath Primaris, a frail man named Lyra, whose eyes had been sacrificed to see the warp's currents, shivered in his choir alcove. My lady, his psychic voice entered her mind, thin and laced with static. There is a dissonance. Vore did not look up from the glowing tactical display. Specify. It is not a scream inquisitor, not an invasion. It is a sound, like a chord. A note in the great Imperial hymn being played, incorrectly, deliberately, terribly flat. It comes from behind us, from the obscurest sector we just departed. Vor finally looked up, her gray eyes as cold as the void between stars. She despised vague portents. Focus, Lyra. The source. It is faint, but growing. A resonance. It feels like faith, but it feels slippery, oily, like promethium on holy water. He shuddered. A world called Gilead. Gilead Primus. Vor frowned. An unknown world. She cast her Imperial tarot across the metal lectern. The card slapped down with a sharp clack. The Emperor reversed. The false prophet. The lightning-struck tower. A nauseating combination of deception and ruin. She felt it. A prickling on the back of her neck. The scent of spiritual rot masked beneath the perfume of piety. Captain, she spoke into the vox, her voice a scalpel's edge. Change course. Divert to the Gilead system. Maximum acceleration. Even the faintest scent of heresy conceals the deepest rot. Aboard the Paradox engine, Malachi watched the oculus of potential. He saw it a tiny, rigid sliver of Imperial order, the Sanctity's blade altering its trajectory. A fish had taken the lure. He had chimed a bell only the hounds of the Ordo Hereticus could hear. Their arrogance in their purity was as reliable as a priest's arrogance in his truth. And then another thread appeared in the tapestry. This one was not subtle. It was jagged, rusted, and smelled of cordite. A single battered ancient Acheron-class cruiser. The iron spite tore its way into reality at the system's outer edge. It bore the sigil of the Iron Hand, the bitter sons of Perturabo, aspiring sorcerer. Tsath. Malachi's apprentice materialized beside him, his form shimmering in warped armor. Master, an unforeseen variable. The Iron Warriors. Shall we destroy them? Malachi did not turn. He observed the iron spite as it began a slow, patient, predatory scan of the system. They were not drawn by faith or prophecy. They were drawn by whispers of technology, or perhaps simple desperation. Unforeseen, Malachi whispered, and a cold, intellectual amusement flickered behind his helm. There are no unforeseen variables, only parts of the machine we had not yet observed in motion. They are the hammer, a perfect tool. They are greedy. They are pragmatic. They will break what must be broken. He looked at the swirling potentials, the Inquisitor's arrival, the Iron Warrior's presence. The canvas had just become more complex, and therefore more beautiful. They are part of the design. He closed his eyes. It was time. A catalyst was needed to mix these ingredients, something to focus their attention, something to turn suspicion into certainty and apathy into greed. His thought stretched out a single psychic imperative, flashing across the void to his agents, waiting in the dungeons of Gilead. Begin. On Gilead Primus, in the grand nave of the Cathedral of the Emperor's Vigil, the midday prayer was underway. Confessor Geyer, his face flushed with the new zeal found in the lost texts, was preaching to a packed throng. He spoke of new revelations and the dawn of a new era. Suddenly, a child in the front pew pointed. "Mother, look, the statue." A hush fell over the crowd, and then a collective disbelieving gasp. The massive obsidian statue of the Emperor, 20 meters tall, and glaring down at the congregation with stern majesty, was weeping. Not tears of blood, that common symbol of martyrdom. From beneath the lifeless stone eyes, two thick, viscous streams of liquid began to flow. They shimmered in the candlelight, catching the light with the color of molten gold. The strange fluid smelling of ozone and hot copper ran down the stone face and dripped onto the altar below. For a second, there was fear. Then an old pilgrim, limping, shuffled forward and dipped a trembling finger into one of the fallen golden drops. He stared at it. Then, in an act of fervent madness, he smeared it on his own forehead. Instead of burning, a euphoric warmth spread through him. His clouded eyes went wide. "It is a miracle," he shrieked, his voice cracking with joy. The Emperor's tears. He blesses us. The chaos turned to ecstasy. The crowd surged forward, desperate for a touch of the alchemical blessing. Confessor Geyer stood stunned at his pulpit, before raising his crozius high, his face a mask of fanatical certainty. "It is the sign," he bellowed. "The prophecy is true. The Savior is coming. He weeps for our past suffering and anoints us with the gold of a new dawn." The news spread like wildfire, and in high orbit, the sensors of the Sanctity's blade began to register a sudden screaming spike of psychic emotion from the capital city. Inquisitor Vor tightened her grip on her bolt pistol. Her suspicions were confirmed. The rot was already breaking the surface. The miracle of the golden tears was only the beginning. It was the crack in the dam, and now the waters of Malachi's design began to flow in earnest. The members of the Hidden Word, released from their cells by a tearfully repentant confessor Gear, who now saw them as misunderstood prophets, dispersed into the population. They were no longer prisoners. They were holy men, and their words were received as gospel. They did not preach heresy. They preached the fulfillment of the Imperial creed. The second miracle began in the sprawling, impoverished slums that clung to the high city's walls. The water from the public wells, normally brackish and tasting of iron, began to run sweet. It tasted of honey and rare spices, and it filled those who drank it with a gentle, uplifting warmth. The populace, already giddy with religious fervor, proclaimed it the Savior's wine. It was, in reality, a low-grade psychotropic stimulant, precisely synthesized, which Malachi's agents had been systematically introducing into the cisterns. It lowered inhibition, heightened emotional responses, and made the drinker intensely susceptible to suggestion. The third miracle followed. The most devout, those who drank deeply of the wine and spent their days praying before the weeping statue, began to exhibit the sacred stigmata. It was not the bloody wounds of a martyred saint. Instead, intricate shimmering patterns like fractal lace would appear on their skin, glowing with a soft, multicolored light. They were hailed as the chosen. They were marks of glory, proof of their purity. Malachi, observing through the psychic senses of his agents, knew it for what it was: the first controlled stages of mutation. A gift from the architect of change. Their faith was literally physically changing them. Into this cauldron of spiritual ecstasy, Inquisitor Katerina Vor descended. She did not arrive in a gilded shuttle to parley with the planetary governor. She arrived in a black, unmarked Valkyrie gunship that screamed down from the sky and landed with a bone-jarring impact in the central courtyard of the PDF garrison. She was flanked by a squad of Tempistus scions, their carapace armor a grim checkerboard of gray and black, their vox grills skull-faced and silent. She ignored the governor and the bowing, ecstatic confessor Geyer, who had rushed to greet her. She stalked past them, her armored boots striking the flagstones like a judge's gavel. "Show me," she commanded. She did not care for the weeping crowds. She pushed through them to the great cathedral. She saw the statue. With a gauntleted hand, she scraped a sample of the still-flowing gold into a cryo-vial. She saw the crowds fighting over a public well. She collected a sample of the wine. She saw a woman kneeling in raptures, her hands glowing with the stigmata. Vor grabbed the woman by the arm, ignoring her screams, and dragged her back to the Valkyrie. In the gunship's cramped troop bay, retrofitted as a mobile laboratorium, the analysis took minutes. The machine spirit of her cogitator was immune to faith. The results were stark and unambiguous. The gold, an exotic alchemical compound skillfully synthesized, base metals transfigured by localized energy. Not divine, just chemistry. The wine, a complex psychotropic agent, Class Delta illegal, a weaponized narcotic designed to induce euphoria and obedience. The stigmata, unstable cellular degradation. The flesh was rewriting itself, responding to a low-level persistent warp signature. Mutation. Filth. Katerina Vore resealed her helm. Her duty was clear. She stalked back into the cathedral, where Confessor Geyer was now mid-sermon preaching to thousands about the new covenant with the God Emperor. Her scions fanned out their hotshot les guns, held at the low ready. Confessor Geyer Vore's voice boomed over the vox, amplified and cutting through the religious chant like glass. In the name of the Emperor, and by the authority of the Ordo Hereticus, you are under arrest for the propagation of heresy and for trafficking with the archenemy. The music stopped. Geyer, his face purpled with outrage, stared down from his pulpit. Heresy. This is a blessing. This is the Emperor's will made manifest. Who are you to challenge a miracle? Vore held up the vial of golden liquid. This is not a miracle. This is a toxin. You are not blessed. You are infected. This entire world has been poisoned by the lies of chaos. She turned to the garrison commander, a hard-bitten PDF officer named Groth, who had watched her arrival with sullen suspicion. Commander Groth, I am requisitioning your forces. Arrest this man and his clergy. We will begin the purge of the infected immediately. A terrible silence filled the cathedral. Commander Groth looked at the Inquisitor. He looked at her skull-faced stormtroopers. Then he looked at the weeping statue and at the crowd, which was now filled with his own soldiers, his neighbors, his family. His own wife had a glowing mark on her hand. He had drunk the water himself. It had made him feel hopeful. Ma'am Groth said, his voice dangerously quiet. With all due respect, those are our people. And that is the Emperor's blessing. He chose us. We will not. The scions raised their weapons. Instantly, 100 las muskets snapped up from the crowd as the PDF soldiers loyal to Groth took aim. The populace, seeing their miracle threatened, surged forward, their faces contorted, not with fear, but with righteous fury. They screamed at Vore, calling her a witch, a blasphemer, the true heretic who was blind to the Emperor's grace. Vore faced the sea of accusations, her bolt pistol drawn. She recognized the trap. The sorcerer had not sent an army. He had co-opted the planet's own. He had weaponized their faith. This was not a cleansing. It was a schism. Aboard the Paradox engine, Malachi smiled. The first note of the symphony was complete. The Imperium was now at war with itself. Aboard the iron-spiked warsmith, Korvax cared nothing for weeping statues or planetary faith. His world was one of numbers, siegecraft, and the cold, hard logic of resource acquisition. His helm, fashioned in the grim likeness of a skull, reflected the flickering data runes of his command throne. His warband was depleted. His ship, hungry for fuel and ammunition after a disastrous engagement with a Necron patrol. Gilead Primus was a primitive mudball, but one that might hold scrap slaves, or at least a moment's bloody distraction. His long-range augers scanned the planet with contemptuous efficiency. He noted the civil disturbance in the capital. He noted the spike of psychic energy. He dismissed it as typical religious hysteria. He noted the single waiting Imperial Navy cruiser. A lone Inquisitor, perhaps, irritating but manageable. He was about to order his ship to the system's asteroid belt to scavenge when a new signal ghosted across his sensors. It was not a Vox hail. It was an ancient encrypted data packet broadcast on a mechanicum frequency so archaic it was almost forgotten. It was a lure cast with perfect precision. From the bridge of the Paradox engine, Malachi Vost did not conjure demons or hurl warp fire. he performed a far more intricate sorcery. He reached into the data stream of the Iron Spite, using the ship's own prying augers as a conduit. He did not create a new signal. He simply altered the data the Iron Warriors were already receiving. He wove a lie out of their own perceptions. The faint geothermal energy signatures beneath the capital's bedrock, Malachi, amplified them, layered them with false harmonics, and tagged them with the irresistible buried signature of a dormant standard template construct. On Korvax's screen, a map of the High City bloomed, and deep beneath the central cathedral, the very site of the miracle, a prize of unimaginable value appeared. A blinking icon labeled Archaeotech Vault. Status dormant. Probable STC power core. Korvax's metallic fingers tightened on the arm of his throne. This changed everything. Slaves were temporary. Faith was an illusion. But Archaeotech, technology was eternal. Technology was power. This backwater world was not a waste. It was a treasure chest, and the primitive locals were squatting on the lid. The Inquisitor's presence now made sense. She was here to claim it for herself. All companies. Korvax's voice grated over the ship's internal vox, a sound like boulders grinding together. Prepare for full planetary assault. Objective, the central fortress structure. Siege protocols. I want the vault underneath it, cracked open before that Imperial dog can secure it. And the Inquisitor's vessel, Warsmith and underling asked, "Ignore it. It cannot stop our landing. We will be dug in before she can react. This is a smash and grab. Overwhelm their pathetic defenses, seize the prize, and depart." The Iron Way. The assault was immediate and brutal. It was not a campaign. It was a demolition. Drop pods like iron fists punched through the atmosphere, slamming into the city's perimeter. Siege dreadnoughts and obliterators teleported directly into the plaza, their weapons already roaring to life, vaporizing the terrified crowds who had been singing hymns only moments before. The Iron Warriors did not distinguish between PDF soldiers and civilians. All were obstacles. Their orbital batteries began a methodical pounding bombardment, not to destroy the city, but to shatter its defensive hardpoints and create breaches in the cathedral's foundation. In the cathedral square, the standoff between Katarina Vor and Commander Growth shattered. The sky ripped open. A barrage of high-explosive shells turned a detachment of PDF soldiers into a red mist. The weeping statue of the Emperor was decapitated by a melt-a-beam from a landing gunship. For a frozen second, all parties stared in horror at the new arrivals. These were not Imperial saviors. They were 8-foot-tall monsters of iron and malice, their armor covered in oaths of vengeance, their guns already leveling the city. The deluded populace, their religious ecstasy instantly replaced by primal terror, screamed and fled. Commander Growth, his face pale with shock, saw his men being torn apart. He turned to Vor, his defiant pride gone. By the throne. What are they? Katarina Vor was already moving her scions, forming a defensive perimeter. The trap had closed. She was caught between a planet of heretics she had come to purge and a full-scale traitor marine invasion. She couldn't fight both. She couldn't abandon the planet to the arch-enemy. Her duty, her rigid, unbending steel of a duty forced her hand. "They are the true enemy, Commander," she roared, firing her bolt pistol at a charging Iron Warrior. "Rally your men. Fight with me, or we all die." She was now inextricably the defender of the very heresy she had come to destroy. She was shielding the miracle from the demons. Malachi watched the tactical display in the Oculus. The Inquisitor was fighting alongside the mutated faithful. The Iron Warriors were dutifully digging towards a non-existent prize. The populace, trapped between the holy miracles within and the unholy monsters without, saw their prophecy in stark, terrifying relief, the time of trial, the darkness before the real Savior. The bait had been taken. The actors were all on stage. War as waged by the sons of Perturabo was not a passion. It was a science. The siege of the High City was a masterpiece of methodical destruction. Warsmith Korvax, from his command throne on the Iron Spite, directed the assault like a grim artisan. Orbital lances, precise and unhurried, struck down the city's ancient buttresses and towers. On the ground, Iron Warriors' Havoc squads established fire bases in the ruins, creating overlapping kill zones. Siege tanks, their hulls scarred with millennia of conflict, ground the rubble of saints' statues into dust as they advanced their demolisher cannons, reducing PDF barricades to craters. Inquisitor. Vor and her scions fought with disciplined fury, but they were a scalpel in a meat grinder. They conducted surgical strikes, blowing up key enemy assets and then vanishing into the smoke. But they could not be everywhere. The bulk of the defense fell to Commander Growth and his PDF, and they were dying. They were hopelessly outmatched in firepower, armor, and experience. For every traitor Marine they managed to wound, they lost a platoon. The line was collapsing not in a rout, but in a controlled bloody disassembly. In a shattered scriptorium turned command post deep beneath the embattled cathedral, Commander Growth stared at his tactical display. It was a sea of crimson runes, each one representing a lost position. His men were fighting for their miracle, but the reality of bolter fire was shredding their newfound faith. "They're through the Martyr's Gate," an officer reported, his voice choked with dust and despair. "They'll be at the main sanctuary within the hour. We can't stop them." Gruth slammed his fist onto the table. "Where is our savior now?" he roared. "He is here, Commander." The voice was calm, untouched by the thunder of the war outside. The herald leader of the Hidden Word stood in the doorway, his simple gray robes immaculate. His blue eyes seemed to glow in the gloom. He walked to the tactical display past the Vox operators and scarred veterans, as if he were strolling through a garden. "You fight with bravery," the herald said, his voice a soothing balm. "But you fight blind. The architect of our ascension sees all. He sees the flaws in the iron." He placed a serene hand on the flickering screen. "Their Vox network, the one they use to coordinate their artillery. It is a thing of pride, and pride is a weakness. They believe it impenetrable, but it broadcasts its targeting solutions on frequency Alpha 9er Kilo." Gruth stared. "That's impossible. That's a low-band civilian frequency. They hide their strength in plain sight," the herald whispered. "Send a simple feedback pulse, a shriek of white noise. It will be distracting." He then pointed to another section of the map, where 3 massive red icons indicated a trio of obliterators. "These monsters. They do not walk. They tear a hole in reality. But the tier requires an anchor. Before each jump, they draw power from their ship. For 3 seconds, their void shields are down. They will appear here." He tapped a ruined courtyard. "The Savior grants you this knowledge. Use it." Growth was a desperate man. His world was ending. This was either madness or salvation. He chose to believe. "Comms, get me a Vox caster. Set it to frequency Alpha 9er Kilo. Broadcast nothing but a full-power shriek. Gunnery Sergeant, take your heavy Lascanon teams to Courtyard Delta. Sight every gun on those coordinates. Fire on my mark." The effect was immediate. In orbit, Korvax's gunnery master howled in frustration as his targeting solutions dissolved into a wall of static. The orbital lances, suddenly blind, began to fire erratically, their pinpoint strikes becoming wild, imprecise blasts. One shell went wide and obliterated an entire forward staging area of his own Iron Warriors. In the city, 3 hulking metal and flesh monstrosities materialized in the courtyard in a flash of blue-white energy. Before they could even raise their cannons, Growth screamed. Now a dozen Lascanan beams pre-aimed and waiting lanced out as one. They struck the unshielded obliterator's slagging armor and vaporizing demonic flesh. One exploded instantly. The other two staggered, critically damaged, and were cut down by the exultant PDF troops, who charged from the ruins, their faith restored to a fever pitch. "The Savior is with us," a soldier screamed, planting his tattered banner in the smoking corpse of the machine fiend. Aboard the Iron Spite Korvax watched his tactical display turn from a clean, logical victory to a chaotic mess. "Report," he bellowed. "Squad Cestus. Terminated Warsmith. Ambushed at their arrival point. Squad Vor hit by our own artillery. The enemy is... They're jamming our primary fire control network." Korvax's skull helm turned towards the image of the Sanctity's blade hanging in orbit. The Inquisitor. His voice was a low, grinding growl. "She is feeding them tactical data. She thinks her little tricks can stop the inevitable." He rose from his throne, his impatience overriding his cold logic. "No more finesse, no more siegecraft. I will not be mocked by these primitives and their Imperial dog." He jabbed a finger at the screen. "Send in the siege breakers. All of them. Level the entire cathedral district. I want that vault even if I have to dig through the Inquisitor's corpse to get it." From his own bridge, Malachi watched the Iron Warriors abandon their precise, efficient plan for a brutish, headlong assault. He had turned the Master of Sieges into a blunt instrument. The Iron Warriors were now the hammer, and the population of Gilead, their faith forged anew by a miraculous victory, was the anvil. The pressure was building perfectly. Katerina Vor was no fool. She knew the difference between disciplined Imperial tactics and this. She crouched behind the shattered remains of a gargoyle, observing the battle raging in the plaza below. A PDF heavy weapons team, guided by a frantic hymn-screaming priest, had just repositioned their Lascanan to an exposed flank. It should have been suicide. Instead, a perfectly timed orbital blast from the Iron Spite, another misfire caused by the Vox jamming, struck the precise spot the Iron Warriors were using for cover, forcing them into the PDF's line of fire. The Lascanan crew fired, scoring a direct hit on a charging Chaos Marine, vaporizing him. The PDF cheered, calling it the Savior's intervention. Vor called it coordinated. "My scions are holding the eastern gate," she muttered, her mind racing. "The Iron Warriors are attacking from the north and west. We are not providing this tactical data. So who is? The miracles were too precise. The enemy's accidents were too convenient. This wasn't just mass hysteria anymore. This was a guided, intelligent defense. She had assumed the enemy sorcerer was focused on the traitor Marines, but this felt different. This felt like a separate hand moving the PDF pieces on the board. Leaving her Scion command squad to manage the perimeter defense, Vor moved alone. She was a ghost in the war zone, slipping through catacombs and ruined alleyways, her inquisitorial rosette granting her passage past the few PDF sentries she encountered. She was not following the sound of the battle. She was following the silence. She was tracing the psychic resonance she had felt from orbit, the oily signature of faith. It was stronger now, a throbbing rhythmic pulse beneath the chaotic din of war. It led her away from the cathedral's main sanctuary, deep into the crypts, below the tombs of ancient planetary governors. The air grew cold. The psychic thrum became a tangible whispering choir. She found its source in a vast vaulted ossuary. There were no demons. There were no mutant champions. There was only the hidden word. The 39 prophets who had supposedly been dispersed to preach were here. They sat in a complex 9-pointed circle, their eyes closed, their faces serene. They were not fighting. They were channeling. In the center of their circle sat the herald, his blue eyes wide and glowing with a soft, warp-fueled light. He was the hub. The others were the spokes, a psychic network of minor league psychers, barely sanctioned their latent abilities, focused and amplified by the Herald. They were the ones receiving Malachi's whispers, the troop frequencies, the teleport anchors, the artillery gaps, and beaming them directly into the minds of Confessor Geyer and the blessed PDF commanders. Vor raised her bolt pistol. This was it. This was the source of the rot. This cabal was the engine driving the planet's madness, the divine voice guiding the holy war. It was the head of the serpent. She had been a fool to focus on the symptoms, the weeping statues, the drugged water. This was the disease. Her tactical mind analyzed the situation with cold clarity. If she destroyed this network, the miracles would cease. The divine guidance would vanish. The PDF's unnatural competence would evaporate. They would break. The fragile, faith-fueled army would shatter, and the full terrifying might of the Iron Warriors would crash down on them. In that moment of absolute despair, with their false prophets dead and their city burning, then they would turn to the only authority left. They would turn to her. She could purge the survivors, restore Imperial order, and deal with the traitor Marines from a position of control. By the Emperor's will, she whispered her certainty absolute. This was the only logical path. She had to destroy the heresy to save the planet. She stepped from the shadows. "Herald," she commanded. The herald's head snapped toward her. His beatific smile did not waver. "Inquisitor," he greeted her, his voice echoing with the power of the 38 minds linked to his. "You are just in time. The architect predicted your arrival." And did he predict this? Vor snapped, leveling her pistol. He did not just predict it. The herald said, a strange, ecstatic joy in his voice. He depends on it. You are the final piece. You are the hand that fulfills the prophecy. Vor ignored the cryptic nonsense. She opened fire. The bolt shell struck the herald in the chest, detonating with righteous fury, obliterating him and the 6 cultists closest to him. The remaining members of the Hidden Word didn't scream. They simply burst. As the central node of the psychic network was annihilated, the raw, focused warp energy they had been channeling now, uncontrolled, flashed outward. It was a psychic explosion, a silent scream that ripped through the stone of the crypt and lanced upwards past the warring city, past the dueling fleets, and into the cold void. It was not a roar of conquest. It was a beacon, a psychic ping of immense concentrated and suddenly released power. Aboard the Paradox engine, Malachi Vost felt the network break. He felt the psychic echo of its destruction, the howl as he had designed. He turned the oculus of potential towards the edge of the system, where a new flickering green light was just beginning to resolve. The sound had gone out, and something in the deep dark had just heard it. "It is done," Malachi whispered. The bait was set. The true trap was sprung. The psychic howl from the ossuary did not just dissipate. It tore through the veil of reality like a distress flare fired in an ocean of predators. In the Imperium, it was not a sound, but a spike of pure, raw event. It screamed of energy, of death, of intense concentration, and of sudden violent release. It was a dinner bell. Far out in the system's desolate asteroid belt, a flotilla of scrap metal monstrosities, their hulls welded together from the wrecks of a dozen different species starships, suddenly powered their engines. They were crude, ugly, and bristling with oversized, mismatched cannons. This was Weg Snagrod, a wandering band of orc freebooters who had been sulking in the system's periphery, bored and looking for a fight. The psychic blast was, to their primitive minds, the equivalent of a dozen planetary governors simultaneously insulting their lineage and daring them to do something about it. It was the irresistible promise of a propa good scrap. Their war boss, a brute named Snagrod Gork. Killa smashed a massive oily fist onto his command console. "What's dat, boys?" He bellowed, his voice a guttural roar. Sounds like a party full speed ahead. Last one to fight is a grot. A swarm of ramshackle vessels spitting uncontrolled bursts of orange flame from their engines, pivoted and burned hard towards Gilead Primus. They were not a fleet. They were a riot looking for a place to happen aboard the Paradox engine. Aspiring sorcerer Tithes watched the green icons of the orc ships flood the tactical display. Master Orcs. This is madness. They are unpredictable. They obey no logic. They will ruin the convergence. They are the convergence, Malachi replied, his voice serene. He gest-viewed to the oculus. Observe, apprentice. The Inquisitor, in her predictable quest for order, destroyed the Psyker net. That was her move. This is the counter-move. Her act of destruction was the precise, calibrated psychic signal I required to draw them in. I did not need to call the orcs. I merely needed to ring a bell loud enough for them to hear. The arrival of Was-Nagrod was not an invasion. It was a catastrophe. The orcs ignored all orbital mechanics, all strategy. They simply cannonballed directly into the ongoing naval engagement between the Iron Spite and the Sanctity's Blade, Warsmith Korvax. His attention focused on his ground assault, and his duel with the Inquisitor's cruiser had less than a minute's warning before the orc flotilla was upon him. Xenos, he roared, as a dozen crude torpedoes slammed into his ship's aft shields. Where did they come from, Inquisitor? Vor, her ship already damaged, and struggling, saw the orcs as a final grim joke by a hateful universe. Her Valkyrie, ascending from the crypts, was rocked as the sky above her ignited. Orbital space above Gilead Primus devolved into a three-way brawl. The Iron Spite, a vessel of calculated siegecraft, was suddenly forced to defend its flanks from suicidal orc boarding torpedoes. The Sanctity's Blade, agile and precise, found itself dodging indiscriminate broadsides from both Traitor and Xenos vessels. The orcs, meanwhile, were having the time of their lives, firing every gun they had at the biggest targets, which happened to be the Iron Spite and the Sanctity's Blade. The effect on the ground was immediate. The methodical orbital bombardment from the Iron Warriors ceased, replaced by the spectacle of burning multi-ton fragments of destroyed ships raining down from the heavens. A crippled orc cruiser plunged through the atmosphere, crashing into the city's abandoned mercantile district in a kilometers-high fireball, obliterating both PDF and Iron Warrior positions in a single indiscriminate apocalypse. Katarina Vor stood atop a ruined bastion, watching the sky burn. The psychic network was gone. The miracles had ceased. But instead of the collapse, she had predicted the battle had just become exponentially more chaotic. The populace, streaming from their homes to see the burning wrecks in the sky, were not terrified into submission. They were awestruck. They pointed at the three-sided war raging above them. "It is the great trial," a priest shrieked, his voice ringing with ecstatic conviction. "The heavens are purged with fire. The false saviors." He pointed at the burning debris of an Iron Warrior. "Frigate are cast down. The true ascension is near." Malachi had not just summoned a new army. He had summoned chaos. He had thrown a rock into the hornet's nest. The Iron Warriors were now trapped. The Inquisitor was now irrelevant. And the population of Gilead Primus, their faith now tested and confirmed by a literal war in the heavens, was being forged into a white-hot singular belief ready for the final stage. Aboard the Paradox engine, the Oculus of Potential was no longer an elegant, swirling galaxy of possibilities. It was a violent, raging storm, a blinding maelstrom of conflicting futures. Red threads of hatred from the Iron Warriors, jagged green lines of pure anarchy from the orcs, and rigid, steely gray threads of Imperial order, all smashed against each other in a chaotic, unpredictable tangle. aspiring sorcerer. Tithes materialized on the bridge, his shimmering form crackling with barely contained panic. He had to project his voice to be heard over the psychic din. "Master, this is beyond control. The orcs are firing on everyone. They've crippled 2 of their own ships." The iron spite has sustained critical damage and is venting atmosphere, but Korvax, in his rage, refuses to withdraw. The Inquisitor's vessel is barely a ship anymore, just a core reactor and a few thrusters, yet she still fights. Tithes pointed a trembling gauntlet at the image of Gilead Primus, now wreathed in the fire of atmospheric debris. The planet itself is shattering. The crossfire from the orbital battle is causing seismic events. The capital city is collapsing into its own catacombs. Any of them, Orcs Iron or the Inquisitor, could issue the killing blow at any moment. The Crucible will be destroyed before the ritual is complete. This is anarchy, not architecture. Malachi Vost stood perfectly still, his back to his apprentice. He was the calm eye at the center of the hurricane. He found the chaos beautiful. "You still see with the eyes of a mortal?" Tithes, his voice resonated, cutting through the psychic noise effortlessly. "You see a plan failing. I see a mechanism functioning perfectly. But Master, anarchy is the architecture," Malachi stated. He turned his helmet's single glowing eye, fixing Tithes in its gaze. "You think I brought them here to fight to win? That is the logic of Khorne. That is the logic of Mortarion. It is dull. It is artless." He gestured to the raging battle. "Each is a tool. Each has a purpose. I have assigned it. Korvax and his iron fools. They are the hammer. They came seeking a prize of cold iron, but their true purpose is to strike the anvil of this world's faith. Their relentless practical brutality gives the Gileadans belief shape. It forges their vague hope into a diamond-hard certainties, a desperate need for the savior." He then indicated the swarm of chaotic green icons. The green tide. The orcs. They are the fire. They are pure, undirected, joyous entropy. They are the furnace. They obey no logic but their own, and in doing so, they are the perfect catalyst. They are the element of change that forces the other more rigid players to abandon their own tedious strategies and simply react. They are the fire that purifies the experiment, burning away the weakness of hesitation. And the Inquisitor Tithes asked, still struggling to comprehend, "Is she the sacrifice?" Malachi almost laughed. The sound was like dust falling on glass. "No, apprentice. She is the most important component of all. She is the witness. She is order. She is the living, breathing, unbending representation of the Imperium's truth. She came here to impose her logic, her steel, her certainty upon this world. For my new truth to be born, the old truth must be present to see it. It must be there to validate its existence by its very opposition." Tith's mind reeled. I don't understand. What then is the goal? We are not conquering Gilead Primus. Malachi explained his patience, that of a master artisan instructing a child. We are using it. This planet is a metaphysical crucible. I have placed 3 perfectly incompatible, philosophically absolute reagents into it, and sealed the lid. The pressure is building. The absolute spiteful greed of the Iron Warriors, the absolute anarchic joy of the Orcs, and the absolute rigid duty of the Inquisitor. Their competing wills are grinding against each other. They are creating what the ancient texts call a point of Odo, a singularity in the skein of fate. A single, infinitely small moment where 999 conflicting futures all converge just for an instant into one. Malachi raised his hand, and the raging storm in the oculus seemed to slow. In that instant, Tithes, when all their wills are focused on a single final act, be it an act of ultimate destruction, desperate survival, or righteous vengeance, reality itself will become pliable. It will become clay. And in that instant, I will provide the new shape. The battle in orbit had devolved from a three-way engagement into a terminal knot of pure spite. Warsmith Korvax, his bridge a flickering hell of damage runes and plasma fires, knew he was finished. The iron spite was a corpse, its spine broken by orc torpedoes, its reactor shielding breached and bleeding raw radiation. He was not a fool. He knew a lost battle. But the logic of siegecraft had been supplanted by the cold, acidic fury of a zealot. He had been tricked. That Inquisitor's ship, a crippled wreck, still hung in the void, a mocking testament to his failure. The Xenos filth swarmed his dying vessel, howling for his head. He would not give them the satisfaction. He would not be boarded. He would not be a trophy. If he could not have the prize, he would deny it to everyone. His metallic gauntlets flew across the command throne, slamming into the failsafe panels. His remaining guns ignored the orcs. His remaining crew were irrelevant. His entire being was focused on a single final act of spite: set the reactor to overload. Uncontrolled detonation, he grated his voice, a mechanical snarl. On my mark, he would turn his entire cruiser into a star fragment, a plasma bomb that would annihilate the orc fleet, vaporize the Inquisitor, and scour the surface of the mudball that had mocked him at the same precise moment on the dark, powerless bridge of the Sanctity's Blade. Katarina Vore made her own final calculation. She was adrift, her engines dead, her crew mostly gone. Her scions on the surface were silent. The heresy had not been contained. The traitors had not been stopped. The Xenos had turned the system into a charnel house. Her mission was a catastrophic failure by every metric save one. One final duty remained. One last, absolute act of Imperial order. Her hand, steady and sure, keyed the final sequence into the high-band astropathic vox. It was a signal of last resort, a plea and a command that would echo to the nearest fortress of the Adeptus Astartes, a call for total, uncompromising purification. She was sending the request for exterminatus. If she could not save the planet, she would save the galaxy from it. It was the only logical, righteous path left. Malachi Vost watched these two wills converge. The Inquisitor, preparing her ultimate act of order. The Warsmith, preparing his ultimate act of hate. The pressure was immense, but the knot was too stable. The orcs, in their anarchic joy, were inadvertently keeping both the Iron Spite and the Sanctity's Blade from executing their final desperate gambits. They were a buffer of chaos, preventing the two absolutes from colliding. The equation is unbalanced, Malachi whispered to Tassath, who watched in horrified awe. The hammer is poised, the scalpel is ready, but the fire is too diffuse. It must be focused. The catalyst must be catalyzed. He gave his first and only direct order to his own fleet. The Paradox engine, a ship of impossible angles and shifting crystal, had remained cloaked in the system's outer dark, a silent observer. Now it moved. It did not join the main battle. That would be too crude. It executed a series of maneuvers that defied physics, a sorcerer's dance through the battlefield. A single lance of pure, coruscating change energy lashed from its prow. It did not strike the Iron Spite. It struck the Orc cruiser that was about to fire on the Iron Spite's exposed engine room. The Orc vessel's guns, supercharged by the Tzinchian energy, detonated prematurely, tearing its own flank open. Korvax, seeing the sudden, inexplicable reprieve, roared in triumph and brought his remaining forward batteries to bear on the largest Orc ship, clearing his line of sight to the Sanctity's Blade. Seconds later, Malachi's weapons fired again. This time, they vaporized the engines of a traitor frigate that was maneuvering for a killing blow on Warboss Snagrod's flagship. The Orcs, seeing their enemy suddenly crippled, roared their approval and renewed their assault on the iron spite with fresh, undivided vigor. T'Zath watched in dawning comprehension. You are keeping them in the fight. You are propping them up. I am balancing the scales. Apprentice Malachi corrected his voice, resonating with the calm of a grandmaster. I am the fulcrum. I help the orcs against the iron. I help the iron against the orcs. I ensure that no one wins and no one can flee. I am forcing them all of them, to their absolute, final, desperate conclusion. I am making them choose. The iron spite shuddered under the renewed, focused orc assault. Alarm screamed across Korvax's bridge, a death knell he could no longer ignore. His ship was dead. His warband was doomed. This was the end. His spiteful, hateful logic became absolute. Now he bellowed, slamming his fist onto the detonation key. On the Sanctity's blade, Katarina Vor received the faint psychic acknowledgement. Her signal was sent. Her duty was done. Malachi Vost watched the two threads of destiny snap taut. The signal of absolute order. The overloading reactor of absolute hate. All converging on one tiny, insignificant world. The Odo point, he breathed. It is here. The universe held its breath. The moment Malachi had engineered the point of Odo had arrived. It was not a grand, thundering instant, but an infinitely small, silent eye in the storm, a single picosecond of absolute potential. It began with the iron spite. Warsmith Korvax's final spiteful command tore his ship apart. The overloaded reactor did not just explode, it detonated. It became a new miniature sun, a catastrophic release of matter energy that expanded in a blinding white sphere. The wave of plasma and radiation vaporized the entire orc flotilla, their howls of joyous battle silenced in an instant. The Sanctity's blade, already a wreck, was atomized, its last defiant signal of exterminatus already echoing far beyond the system's edge. The shockwave, a wave of pure concentrated hate, washed over Gilead Primus. Simultaneously on the planet's surface, the sky turned white. The populace, who had been watching the holy war in the heavens, fell to their knees. The Iron Warriors, their orbital support, gone, their warsmith dead, their gunships vaporized, looked up in stunned confusion. Moments before the wave of superheated radiation turned them to ash. The PDF commander, Groth, the priests, all were consumed. But their deaths were not the point. It was their belief in that final second. As the heavens burned with the fire of Korvax's hatred, the people of Gilead saw not an exploding traitor ship. They saw their prophecy fulfilled. They saw the Savior arriving in a chariot of divine cleansing fire. They saw the false saviors the Iron Warriors consumed. They saw the heavens ascend. In that one final ecstatic moment before their atoms were scattered, their collective planet-wide belief, a belief forged by miracles, hammered by siege, and purified by chaos, peaked. It became a psychic spike of pure, unadulterated faith. Katarina Vor, in the nanosecond before her bridge became a star's core, felt her signal sent. She had done her duty. She had upheld the law. She had activated the ultimate expression of Imperial order. Her final thought was one of grim, righteous satisfaction. Three absolutes, all culminating in a single instant, all focused on one point in space-time. The absolute hate of Korvax, fueling a physical annihilation. The absolute faith of Gilead Primus, fueling a psychic reality. The absolute order of Katarina Vor, fueling a conceptual judgment. Aboard the Paradox engine, Malachi Vost stood at the center of his own ritual circle, the bridge of his ship, now a vortex of raw power. He did not need to sacrifice anyone on a bloody altar. He had made his enemies sacrifice themselves. He had engineered a scenario where their own natures, Korvax's spite, Vor's rigidity, Gilead's desperation, were the components of his spell. The entire system had become his sacrificial dagger. Now Tithes witness, Malachi roared his voice, no longer a whisper, but a sound of cosmic creation. He spread his arms wide. He did not fight the tidal wave of psychic energy that erupted from the system's death. He opened himself to it. He was not a dam, he was a conduit. The raging contradictory forces of hate, faith, and order, a mixture that should have torn his very soul apart, poured into him. He was not seizing Gilead Primus, he was harvesting it. The target was never the planet. It was never the archaeotech. It was never the people. It was the prophecy itself. For 1,000 years, the Gilead prophecy of a savior from the stars was a lie, a piece of ignorant folklore. But Malachi, by bringing the Iron Warriors, the false saviors, by bringing the Inquisitor, the righteous trial, and by culminating it all in a fiery ascension that perfectly matched the myth, had done the impossible. He had gathered so much belief, so much congruent emotion and energy, and focused it with such precision that in the instant of its destruction, he made the lie true. He had not just fulfilled the prophecy, he had retroactively validated it. He had reached back and forced reality to conform to the superstition. He was not just a sorcerer, he was an author, and he had just written the final binding chapter of Gilead's history, turning his fan fiction into canon. The energy surged through him, the power of a lie made real, the power of an entire world's soul belief, compressed into a single metaphysical concept. Malachi Vost, Lord Sorcerer, began to unravel. The convergence was not the end, it was the primer. As the white-hot sphere of Korvax's spiteful sacrifice expanded, annihilating the battlefield, two new actors arrived. First was the Exterminatus signal. Katerina Vor's dying act of order had found its recipient. A fleet of gray knights, their silver hulls etched with wards of purity, tore their way out of the warp, precisely 9 seconds after the Iron Spite's detonation. They were an army of ultimate sanction, arriving to purge a world that was technically already gone. They found only a system-wide tomb, an expanding cloud of superheated gas, and a psychic echo of such complex, contradictory malice that their librarians reeled in psychic pain. They were 9 seconds too late to stop the heresy. They were 9 seconds too late to save the Inquisitor. They were 9 seconds too late to enact their judgment. Their arrival, an unstoppable force of Imperial will, meant to strike an object found no object to strike. Their entire massive righteous purpose was rendered moot, their judgment unleashed, but unfulfilled. This colossal frustrated energy of purpose, denied, became the final unexpected ingredient in Malachi's spell. At the same instant, the second arrival occurred, the Paradox engine itself. Malachi's flagship cloaked, and waiting now plunged directly into the expanding heart of the reactor's detonation. Tithes screamed as his console dissolved into white light. The ship's shields vaporized in a femtosecond, but the ship was not a target. It was the eye of the needle. In the 9 seconds between the Iron Spite's explosion and the Grey Knight's arrival, Malachi Vost orchestrated his true masterpiece. He stood on his bridge, a vortex of impossible energies, and channeled. Second 1. The wave of hate from Korvax's death, spite washed over him. He did not block it. He absorbed it, using it as the raw fuel, the heat for his forge. Second 3. The psychic crest of Gilead's collective faith. The belief in their ascension hit him. It was the material he would shape the pure conceptual metal. Second 5. The lingering ghost signal of Vor's order, her call for Exterminatus, provided the pattern, the unbending logical framework for the spell. Second 7. The Iron Spite's reactor core, the physical epicenter of the blast, finally reached the Paradox engine. Second 9. The Grey Knight fleet arrived, unleashing their wave of frustrated, unspent judgment. It was this final wave, this 9th second ingredient, that Malachi had been waiting for. It was the quenching agent, the cold water to temper the red-hot steel. He took the hate fuel, used it to forge the faith material, shaped it with the order pattern, and then, at the instant of its creation, he tempered it all in the cold, absolute judgment of the Grey Knights. The entire system, the ships, the people, the planet, the traitors, the Xenos, the Inquisitor, and even the Grey Knights had been turned into a single vast, hyper-complex ritual implement. They were all cogs in his great machine, on the bridge of the Paradox engine, as the energies of a dead star system and a frustrated fleet of demon hunters converged on his single mortal form. Malachi Vost screamed. It was a sound of 9 notes, a chord of impossible agony and ecstatic, terrible enlightenment. The energies were too vast. They did not just empower him, they unmade him. His physical form, his cerulean armor, his very bones, all were annihilated, turned to constituent data in the roiling sea of potential. He had gathered the power to make a lie true, and now the lie had consumed its creator. Malachi the man was gone. But the plan had just been born. The Paradox engine did not survive. It too was an offering. As the Grey Knight flagship, the Honored Ire registered the cataclysmic energy surge. Its sensors reported the impossible. The epicenter of the detonation, the very point where the Iron Spite had died, was empty. But it was not the emptiness of the void. It was a perfect, absolute nothing, a hole in reality that was actively consuming the residual radiation, the psychic echoes, and the very light of the system's distant star. A sphere of pure conceptual negation. Then from the center of that void, something stepped out. It was not a demon prince. That was never the goal. To become a demon prince is to become a slave, a pet, beholden to the whims of a greater god. It is the logic of Khorne, a reward for crude slaughter. It is the logic of Slaanesh, a prize for exquisite feeling. It is the logic of Nurgle, a comfort for enduring despair. It is, Malachi had always believed, a failure of the imagination. What emerged was a suit of armor. It was the ornate cerulean plate of Malachi Vost, but it was now different. The armor was empty, yet it moved. It was not filled with flesh, nor was it filled with fire. It was filled with narrative. The fractal patterns on its pauldrons now shifted constantly, writing and rewriting themselves in a language that hurt the eyes to see. Where the sorcerer's head should have been, there was only a vortex of cold, multicolored light, a miniature captured oculus of potential. He had not ascended to demonhood. He had ascended into a concept. He had absorbed the very essence of the fulfilled prophecy. He had become a living, sentient, weaponized lie. He was no longer just the Fate Weaver. He was the Fate. Tazath, his form, blasted to near non-existence, found his essence pulled from the dissipating wreckage of the bridge. He reformed before his master, a shimmering, terrified ghost of data. Master. What? What are you? The voice that answered was not Malachi's. It was a chorus of the entire Gilead system. It was the dying scream of Korvax, the serene whisper of the Herald, the dying prayer of the faithful, and the cold, static-laced command of Katarina Vor. It was a symphony of contradictions, all playing in perfect, terrible harmony. We are the logic. We are the thesis proven. They believed in a savior, so we became the savior. They believed in ascension, so we have ascended. The truth is what we declare it to be, because we have forged the proof. The being that was Malachi raised a gauntlet. The empty armor pulsed with power. He had not just gained power, he had become a new kind of power. He was an abstract, made manifest, a living prophecy with the ability to edit its own terms. He had done what Tzeentch coveted most. He had not just changed reality. He had forced it to admit it was wrong. and then rewritten its own rules. The Grey Knights, sensing this new impossible entity, opened fire. Blessed bolts, psychic lances, macro cannon shells. A storm of absolute righteous purity converged on the single impossible figure. The attack did not strike armor. It struck logic. The bolts passed through the space where Malachi should be, as if he were a mirage. But he was not. He was simply operating on a different axis of reality. Trying to shoot him with a bolt gun was like trying to kill a mathematical theorem with a hammer. The Grey Knights were firing at the answer, not the equation. Their certainty is a cage. The new Malachi resonated his voice, impressing itself directly onto the minds of the Grey Knight commanders. We are the key. The experiment is a success. The empty suit of armor turned its vortex visage sweeping across the void and vanished, leaving the horrified Grey Knights alone in a dead system with nothing to fight but an echo. Katerina Vor's eyes snapped open. The air was not filled with fire and the ozone screech of her dying bridge. It was cold, sanctified. The air hummed, not with machinery, but with a low choral chant, and it smelled of micro-incense and blessed oils. She was lying on a steel slab in a silver hexagonal room. She is awake. The voice was a resonated bass, pure and without inflection. A Grey Knight, his silver Terminator armor radiating an almost painful aura of psychic purity, stood in the doorway. He was helmetless, his face a roadmap of pious scars. Inquisitor Katerina Vor. I am Brother Captain Palamon of the Honored Ire. Katerina sat up, her body aching. Her mind raced. My ship, the Sanctity's blade, was destroyed. Palamon stated, his voice devoid of emotion. We answered your call. Our teleporters locked onto your astropathic signal's biosignature in the final picosecond before your vessel was annihilated. A distortion in the warp allowed the retrieval. The Emperor protects. A distortion Vor thought her blood running cold. Or an allowance. She was brought to the bridge of the Honored Ire. It was not a bridge. It was a fortress cathedral, all silver and black marble, bristling with warding sigils and ancient skull-faced servitors. Through the immense crystal viewport, she saw nothing. Where the Gilead system had been, there was only a roiling, dissipating cloud of gas and radiation haunted by the psychic screams of billions. The system is purged, Palamon said. He believed he was delivering a grim report. The Xenos fleet, the traitor vessel, all consumed. Your signal was righteous. The taint is cleansed. Katerina stared into the void. She had won. She had paid the ultimate price, sacrificing her ship, her crew, and an entire planetary population. But she had won. The heresy was cauterized. The Iron Warriors were destroyed. The Orcs were vaporized. It was the cold, terrible, righteous victory of the Inquisition. She felt the grim satisfaction of duty performed to its absolute horrifying conclusion. And then every screen on the bridge flickered. The calm data slate green of the tactical displays dissolved into a vortex of swirling, impossible color, the same colors she had seen in the heretic's stigmata. The holy chants of the servitors were replaced by a new sound, a chorus, the sound of 1 billion dying screams, a warsmith's dying rage, and a priest's dying prayer, all harmonized into a single patient academic voice. Inquisitor Katerina Vor. Palamon and his Grey Knights instantly leveled their storm bolters at the viewport, at the screens, at the very air. Blasphemer sorcerer, show yourself to the Emperor's judgment. I am already here. I am in the void you created. I am in the signal you sent. The voice was not mocking. It was not triumphant. It was grateful. Thank you. What is this? Vor whispered, her certainty beginning to fracture. What did you do? The main viewport shimmered, no longer showing the void, but replaying the battle from a God's eye perspective. She saw the iron spite's explosion. She saw the psychic wave of Gilead's faith. And she saw her own dying signal, a beam of pure order lancing into the heart of the chaos. The warsmith's hate was the fire. Malachi's choral voice explained as if to a student. The planet's faith was the steel. But a sword forged in fire alone is formless. It is raw chaos. It shatters. It required a temper. It needed to be quenched. It needed an absolute. It needed your logic inquisitor. The image on the screen zoomed in on the ghost of her astropathic signal. Your exterminatus request. Your pure, unbending, righteous judgment. It was not a play. It was the final binding rune. It was the cold water that gave my creation form. It made the lie permanent. The voice focused on her, a terrible personal intimacy that violated the holy air of the bridge. You did not purge Gilead. You consecrated it. Your righteous fire was the holy water that baptized my new truth. By adhering to your rigid truth, you forged mine. Your destruction was my creation. You were the witness. And you, Katarina Vor, were the final artisan. Katarina Vor stared at her own reflection in the viewport superimposed over the image of the dead system. She saw the horror. She had not won. She had not even lost. She had served. And in that moment, her steel trap mind, the mind that saw only the logic of the Imperium, was forced to see the new maddening logic that had used hers as a tool. She was the witness, and her unbending faith was the final perfect proof of his thesis. The void left by Malachi's departure on the honored Ayer's viewport was absolute. And in an instant, Tithes was no longer a ghost of data on a dead ship. He was reformed, his psychic essence pulled across the galaxy and rewoven into a semblance of his old form. He found himself standing on a floor made of shifting, impossible crystalline sigils in a space that was not a ship, but a concept. It was an observatory. Before him, where a viewport should be, was a new oculus of potential. No longer a swirling mass of chaos, but a vast, terrifyingly intricate, three-dimensional tapestry. A web of fate that represented the entire galaxy. Before it stood the new Malachi, the empty vortex-filled armor. He was not looking at the tapestry. He seemed to be listening to it, his head tilted as if to a symphony. His voice trembling and thin knelt. Master, Architect, it is done. Gilead is gone. The Inquisitor, she knows. The Grey Knights hunt for you. We have won, but what? What is the victory? What do we do now? The entity that was Malachi did not turn. His choral voice filled the non-space, a sound of colliding, unanswerable questions. Now is a mortal concern, a limitation of linear thought. We have passed beyond now. We have begun. Malachi raised a gauntlet, and the tapestry zoomed in. Tithes saw a single new, brightly glowing thread pulsating with a sick, multicolored light. It was the thread of the Gilead prophecy, the lie made true. It was beautiful, and it was grotesque. Gilead Primus was not the objective apprentice. Malachi's voice resonated. It was the foundry. It was the test. It was experiment 1.0. We tested a hypothesis. Can a truth be created from nothing? Can a lie, if believed with sufficient fervor, forged in the fires of absolute hate and quenched in the cold of absolute order, become a fact? The entity turned its vortex-filled helm towards Tithes. The answer is yes. We have created a reality from a rumor. We have forged a metaphysical fact. Tithes struggled to comprehend. A fact, Master. But to what end? You have sacrificed a system. You have become this. All for a single dead story on a forgotten world. You see the single thread apprentice. Malachi's voice was laced with an academic's cold patience. "You do not see the garment it is attached to." With a gesture, the oculus pulled back and back and back. The galaxy web was revealed. Tithes gasped. The small, sickly glowing thread of Gilead was just one tiny frayed end of a much larger thread. A colossal, burning, blindingly golden cable of pure psychic energy that snaked through the entire Imperium, its source a supernova of brilliance that Tithes recognized with primal terror. Terra, the Astronomicon, the Gilead prophecy, the savior from the stars. It was not unique, Malachi explained. It was a local degenerate cultural echo, an imperfect reflection of a much greater foundational truth, the central lie upon which the entire Imperium is now built. Tithes' mind, expanded by his sorcerous nature, made the final horrifying connection. The divinity of the corpse emperor, precisely. The vortex in Malachi's helm flared. For 10,000 years they have been building their own god from their terror and their desperate screaming hope. They are unknowingly running the same experiment I just perfected. But they are blind. They are children stumbling in the dark building. A reactor with no manual praying it gives them light and not a holocaust. They are forging their own truth with their unified faith. Malachi pointed his armored finger at the Gilead thread. Gilead is the proof of concept. It is the mechanism. It proves that this galactic truth they are building is not immutable. It can be edited. It can be redirected. It can be rewritten. The true maddening logic of the plan was finally revealed. They have built the single most powerful psychic weapon in the history of the galaxy, and I have just reverse-engineered its operating manual. Gilead was the key. I did not seek to conquer a planet. I sought to learn how to hijack a god. The conceptual space that was Malachi's new bridge shifted. The paradox engine was no more but its essence. Its purpose had been folded into its master. Malachi and his sanctum were now one and the same, existing as a parasitic idea latched onto the fabric of the immaterium. Tithes, now less an apprentice and more an acolyte to a new form of truth, watched as his master prepared for the true work to begin. The entity that was Malachi, the empty suit of armor filled with narrative, gestured to the vast galactic tapestry of fate. The single glowing thread of Gilead Primus was now his focus. He pulled at it, not with physical force, but with conceptual will. He edited it. The experiment is complete. The choral voice resonated through Tithes' mind. Now, the application. The tapestry shifted. The oculus zoomed out from Gilead and across the breadth of the segmentum obscurus. 8 other stars flared into view, marked by Malachi's impossible senses. 8 other worlds, insignificant backwater forgotten. A feral world named Hecuba, where primitive tribes worshipped a sky god who bled fire. A dying forge world, Serene Mahoris, where the remaining Skitari whispered of an archmagos who would return from the void to restart the great furnaces. A hive world, Noctis, choked in perpetual darkness, where the underhive gangers held a death cult centered on a final dawn that would burn away their misery. 8 worlds, each with its own local myth, its own lie, its own pathetic, desperate, degenerate echo of the great Imperial truth. Gilead was the prototype, Malachi stated. His voice was no longer just the sound of Gilead's dead. It was colder, sharper. The sound of a theorem proven an equation solved. It was impure, crude. We used hammers like orcs and spies like mortals. We relied on the chaos of others. It was an excellent but inefficient forge. The vortex within his helm turned fixing Tithes with its analytical gaze. Now we have the formula. We know the variables: hate, faith, order, judgment. We no longer need to be so. Theatrical. He raised his hand, and the new fleet, a single impossible thought form that was once a sorcerer, began its journey. It didn't sail the warp. It thought itself to its next destination. We will repeat the experiment, Malachi declared. 8 more times. 9 theses, 9 proofs, 9 refinements of the logic. The true maddening logic was finally laid bare. He was not just going to prove his theorem once, he was going to peer review it, refine it, perfect it 9 times over. Each time he would forge a new truth from a local lie. Each time he would harvest the conceptual energy. Each time he would add another perfected weaponized fact to his arsenal. He would create a chorus of 9 fulfilled prophecies. 9 new realities. 9 lies made true, all echoing the same central theme of salvation and ascension, all perfectly engineered, all his. One proof can be dismissed as an anomaly, the entity whispered. 9. 9 becomes a pattern. 9 becomes a law. 9 becomes a truth, powerful enough to challenge the truth of Terra itself. The Imperium is building their god. We will build an argument so perfect, a logic so undeniable, that it will convince their fledgling god to change its mind. The plan was not to kill the Emperor. It was not to overthrow Terra. It was to edit the God Emperor. To use the Imperial faith as a backdoor, and with 9 perfect proven arguments, rewrite the very nature of the Imperium's burgeoning deity. The architect of change had found his ultimate medium. The audio log crackles to life. The sound is thin, dry, and filtered through multiple layers of encryption. It is the voice of Katarina Vore recorded in the cold silver confines of a scriptorium aboard the Grey Knight strike cruiser Honored Ire. Her voice is steady, but all the steel has been hammered out of it. It is the voice of a bell that has been cracked. Archive log Ordo Hereticus, encrypt level Omega Plus, Inquisitor Katarina Vore reporting. Subject, the Gilead Primus pacification. Reference Exterminatus, Order 994, Alpha. A pause, the sound of a breath being drawn sharp and controlled. By official Imperial decree, the planet Gilead Primus has been deemed perdita. The taint of a multifaceted heresy compounded by a Traitor Legion incursion and a Xenos Orc infestation was deemed absolute. In accordance with my authority, I issued the call for terminal sanction. The Grey Knights of Strike Force, Palamon, responded. Upon their arrival, all hostile elements, and the planet itself, had been consumed by a localized stellar event. The system is cleansed. The threat is neutralized. A victory by the metrics of my holy office. The Emperor protects. Another pause. Longer this time. The record chime clicks off. A different chime clicks on. A private log. Her voice returns, and this time the perfect control is gone. It is a whisper, a forced confession. This is not for the Ordos. This is for whatever soul finds this after my death. I write this because I must. Because logic must be answered, even if it is a logic from beyond. I have seen the face of the true archenemy. It is not the snarling beast of Khorne. It is not the seductive pestilence of Nurgle. It is a reasoning, a theorem. I am a creature of logic. I believe in cause and effect. I believe that A plus B equals C. I came to Gilead to solve an equation of heresy, and I found a mathematician. Her voice strains the words themselves fighting her. He did not deploy chaos. He calibrated it. He did not sow anarchy. He architected it. Every variable, it was planned. The predictable base greed of the Iron Warriors that was his hammer. The joyous, mindless anarchy of the Orcs that was his fire. The planet's desperate blind faith that was his material. And I, a single dry sob cut short. My logic. My unbending, righteous, predictable Imperial order. I was the final component. I was the cold water to quench the blade. I was the binding agent. He did not fight me. He solved me. He knew my every move before I even conceived of it, not because he is a prophet, but because he wrote the equation. My adherence to my duty was the final necessary variable that made his solution true. This is the maddening logic. It is not the absence of order. It is a terrifying order. A super logic so vast, so patient, so utterly alien, that it sees our entire civilization, our faith, our wars, our very souls, as mere components in a thesis. We are not his enemy. We are his material. I signed the death warrant for 1 billion souls, and in doing so I placed the final perfect keystone in his design. I did not win. I concluded. Her voice fades. The silver scriptorium melts away. We are in the non-space, the conceptual observatory. The entity that was Malachi stands before the vast, impossible web of fate. It is a shimmering galactic map, but the stars are not stars. They are nodes. The connections are not warp routes. They are threads of potential humming with power. The acolyte to Soth kneels in the impossible distance, a silent observer to a cosmic work. Malachi, the empty vortex-filled suit of armor, gazes at the map. One thread labeled Gileadus shines with a bright, sickly, multicolored light. It is a note that has been played, a proof that has been proven. 8 other threads are connected to it. They are dim, waiting. Hecuba, Serene Majoris, Noctis. The new Malachi does not move, but his will extends. A single conceptual hand reaches out. It does not grasp the second thread, the one marked Hecuba. It plucks it, gently. A single, silent, cosmic twang. And far, far away on a feral world of smoking volcanoes and deep jungles, a tribal shaman, his face painted in ash, is chanting to the sky god who bleeds fire. He freezes. The rattling bones in his hand clatter to the packed earth. He stares wide-eyed at the sacred volcano. The lava, which has always flowed red with his god's rage, suddenly sputters. A single molten stream of pure, glittering gold flows down its side. It is not rage. It is a tear. The shaman falls to his knees, his mind shattered and remade. A new truth, a new lie has been planted. Back in the observatory, a sound begins. It is not Malachi. It is a resonance from outside, from beyond. It is the sound of the great changer, the architect of fate, Tzinch himself. It is not the cackle of a madman. It is not the roar of a simpleton. It is the dry, deep, infinitely complex chuckle of a scientist who has just watched his impossible theorem be proven. It is the sound of quod erat demonstrandum, that which was to be demonstrated. The vortex within Malachi's helm spins, and he turns his attention to the third thread. The plan had only just begun.